That $500 laptop on the shelf at Best Buy isn't actually $500. And by the time I show you the full receipt, you're going to be genuinely angry. I want to be upfront about something before we get into this. I'm not here to tell you Windows is evil or that Linux is perfect. I ran Windows for 19 years. I defended it. I troubleshot it for friends and family. I paid for it. And it wasn't until I sat down with a spreadsheet and actually calculated what that relationship had cost me that I realized the conversation about which is cheaper was never being had honestly. So let's have it now. Because when you grab that $500 laptop off the shelf, you are making a financial commitment that extends years beyond that price tag. And the alternative, a machine running Linux, potentially built from hardware you already own, is sitting right next to it, completely free, and most people walk right past it. Let me show you exactly what the full picture looks like. Let's start with the box itself, because the hardware story is more interesting than most people realize. A $500 Windows laptop in 2024 lands you in a very specific tier of machine. You're typically looking at an Intel Core i5 or AMD Ryzen 5 processor, 8 gigabytes of RAM, which Microsoft's own documentation will tell you is the minimum recommended for Windows 11 to run well. A 256 gigabyte SSD, if you're lucky, sometimes still a spinning hard drive if you're not, and a 1080p display that the manufacturer has tuned to look great in the store under fluorescent lighting and somewhat less great in your actual home. These are the Dell Inspirons, the Acer Aspires, the Lenovo IdeaPads, solid functional machines. No complaints about the hardware itself. But here's what that $500 actually buys you. A license to use Windows 11 Home, which means you're also buying into Microsoft's current business model for what happens on that machine after you turn it on. And that is a separate conversation from the hardware entirely. Now look at the Linux side of this comparison. The free PC in our title can mean two different things, and I want to be precise about both. The first option is a machine you already own, an older laptop, or desktop that Windows has either stopped supporting or is running sluggishly on, revived with a Linux distribution at zero cost. The second option is a new machine, same $500 budget, same hardware specs, but with no Windows license baked into the price. That license typically adds between $100 and $150 to the cost of a consumer laptop, a figure confirmed by pricing comparisons across bare metal machines and their Windows equivalent counterparts. So option 2 puts you at roughly $350 to $400 for identical hardware. That remaining $100 to $150 stays in your pocket on day one. Stay with me here, because the day one savings are actually the least interesting part of this story. The more revealing number is the 3-year cost. Independent research from the tech analysis firm Gartner, as well as consumer breakdowns published by the Wirecutter and How To Geek's long-form cost analyses, consistently find that Windows users accumulate recurring costs that Linux users simply don't. Let's walk through the real ones. Microsoft 365. If you use Word, Excel, or Outlook, and most people do, you're looking at $70 per year for the personal plan or $100 per year for family. Over 3 years, that's $210 to $300. Linux users running LibreOffice, which handles the vast majority of Office file formats, including .docs and .xlsx, without issue, pay exactly $0. OneDrive storage. The free tier gives you 5 gigabytes, which runs out roughly the first time you back up your phone photos. The 100 gigabyte plan runs $24 per year. Over 3 years, $72. Linux users have a dozen free or open source alternatives: Nextcloud, SyncThing, RCalone to any cloud provider, none of which require a subscription. Antivirus. Now, Windows Defender is built in and it's actually competent. I want to be fair about that. Security researchers at AV-Test, the independent German security institute, consistently give Defender high marks for detection rates. But many users, either out of habit or at the recommendation of retail staff, still purchase third-party antivirus suites. The average paid antivirus subscription runs $40 to $60 per year. For users who buy it, that's another $120 to $180 over 3 years. Linux users, due to the fundamentally different architecture of the operating system, including lower market share making it a less attractive target, and a permission model that limits what any single process can do, typically run without paid antivirus at all. Add it up. Over 3 years, a typical Windows user on that $500 laptop spends between $400 and $550 in software subscriptions on top of the hardware cost. A Linux user on equivalent hardware, or revived old hardware, spends close to $0. Think about that for a second. The $500 laptop has a realistic 3-year total cost of ownership between $900 and $150. The free Linux PC, even if you account for a small learning curve and occasional troubleshooting, stays near its original price. But here's what really bothers me about this. These numbers are available. They're not hidden. Microsoft publishes its subscription pricing on its own website. And yet the retail conversation, the YouTube conversation, the tech media conversation almost always starts and ends with the sticker price. Is it worth $500? Well, is what worth $500? The hardware? Or the hardware plus the subscription model you're enrolling in? Microsoft doesn't make most of its money selling you Windows. They make it from what happens after you turn it on. This is the part of the story that explains why the sticker price conversation stays shallow. Because if you understood Microsoft's actual revenue model, you'd ask different questions at the register. In Microsoft's fiscal year 2024 earnings reports, which are public documents available at Microsoft.com/investor, the Productivity and Business Processes segment, which includes Microsoft 365 subscriptions, generated over $77 billion in revenue. The More Personal Computing segment, which includes Windows licensing, generated around $59 billion. But here's the thing, a large chunk of that Windows number comes from OEM licensing, meaning Microsoft collects a fee every time Dell, HP, Lenovo, or Acer puts Windows on a machine before it ships. The consumer who buys the laptop isn't paying Microsoft directly. The manufacturer is, and that cost gets folded into the price you see on the shelf. So Microsoft gets paid twice. Once, when the hardware manufacturer licenses Windows to put on your machine, and again, and again, and again, every year you subscribe to Microsoft 365, buy additional OneDrive storage, or use Bing for searches that feed their advertising and AI data pipelines. It's like buying a printer for $49 knowing the ink costs $30 every few months. The printer is the entry point, not the product. You are the product, or more precisely, your ongoing subscription relationship is the product. I want to be measured here because Microsoft isn't a cartoon villain. They build genuinely useful software. Teams, Azure, Visual Studio. These are tools that professionals rely on and pay for willingly. But that business model, when applied to a consumer laptop sold to a student or a retiree on a budget, creates a hidden obligation that was never explained at the point of sale. And when I realized this, when I actually mapped out my own Microsoft spending over 5 years and saw the number, I wasn't angry at Microsoft. I was frustrated with myself for not doing the math sooner. If you felt like something was off every time you got the notification to renew your subscription or upgrade your storage, you were right to feel that way. That feeling was accurate. Here's where Linux flips the model entirely. The organizations and developers maintaining major Linux distributions, Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Fedora, Pop! OS, operate primarily on foundation funding, corporate sponsorship from companies like Canonical and Red Hat, and voluntary donations. The operating system itself is open source, meaning the code is public, auditable, and free to distribute. There is no subscription model for the OS. There is no data pipeline feeding an advertising product. The software exists to be used, not to monetize the user. Linus Torvalds, the original creator of the Linux kernel, has maintained since the project's beginning in 1991 that the kernel should remain freely distributable. That philosophy has held for over 30 years and is encoded in the GPL license governing the project. That's not marketing language, it's a legal commitment. So what can you actually do with this information? Let me show you. So let's build the other side of this comparison from the ground up, because free Linux PC sounds like a catch, and I want to show you exactly why it isn't. I'm going to give you 4 realistic scenarios here, because the right answer genuinely depends on where you're starting from. The first scenario is the revived old machine. You have a laptop or desktop that's 3 to 8 years old. It runs Windows 10, it's getting sluggish, and Microsoft has announced that mainstream support for Windows 10 ends in October 2025, at which point security updates stop, and the official recommendation is to upgrade to Windows 11 or buy new hardware. Here's the problem. A significant percentage of machines from that era don't meet Windows 11's hardware requirements, specifically the TPM 2.0 chip requirement that Microsoft added with Windows 11's launch. According to analysis by Lansweeper, an IT asset management firm that surveyed millions of enterprise devices, over 55% of Windows 10 machines, in their dataset failed Windows 11 compatibility checks when the new requirements were announced. So Microsoft's position, whether intentional or not, is your hardware is fine, but it's not our hardware anymore. Linux's position is different. Ubuntu 24.04, Linux Mint 22, and most major current distributions will run comfortably on hardware going back to 2012. Or 2013, a Core i5 second generation, 4 gigabytes of RAM, an old SSD, or even a hard drive. The same machine that Windows is retiring, Linux will run smoothly on for another 5 years. If this is your situation, here's what you do. Download Linux Mint 22. I specifically recommend Mint for this scenario because it has the most Windows-like interface, the smoothest hardware compatibility, and the strongest community for newcomers. The download is free at linuxmint.com. You flash it to a USB drive using a free tool called Balena Etcher, also available at balena.io. You boot from the USB, try the live environment without installing anything to confirm your hardware works, and if it does, which it will in the vast majority of cases, you install. The whole process takes about 45 minutes. Your machine goes from a device Windows is abandoning to a device with a fresh, fully supported operating system for $0. The second scenario is the budget laptop buyer. You're in the market for a new machine, $400 to a $600 budget. You're comparing a $500 Windows laptop to something in the same price range running Linux. Here, the hardware is largely the same. The difference is whether you're paying the Windows tax. System66 makes laptops specifically designed for Linux, starting around $500 with no Windows license in the price. Framework laptops are another strong option. Modular, repairable, Linux compatible out of the box. Dell actually sells a range of developer edition laptops with Ubuntu pre-installed, often at a slight discount compared to their Windows equivalents. If you're buying new and you're open to Linux, these are worth comparing directly against the Best Buy shelf. The third scenario is the everyday user who's curious but nervous. You use a browser, email, streaming video, maybe some light document editing. The honest truth, and I want to be honest about the trade-offs here, is that this use case is where Linux has made the most progress in the last 5 years, and where the gap between Windows and Linux is narrowest. Chrome, Firefox, and Chromium all run on Linux natively. Your streaming services, Netflix, YouTube, Spotify, all run in the browser on Linux without any special configuration. LibreOffice opens and saves Microsoft Office files. Your email, whether it's Gmail or Outlook Web, runs in the browser. The learning curve for this profile of user is genuinely low. The biggest adjustments are aesthetic. The App Store looks different, the settings menu is organized differently, and some things you used to click, click, done now require a quick search for the Linux equivalent. That's real, and I don't want to minimize it. But it's a few hours of adjustment, not a months-long retraining. The fourth scenario, and this is the one where I'll be honest about Linux's genuine limitations, is the power user or professional. If you use Adobe Creative Suite, you need Windows or Mac. Adobe does not make Creative Cloud for Linux, and the Wine compatibility layer, while impressive, is not a reliable substitute for professional creative workflows. If you're a hardcore PC gamer, the situation is better than it's ever been. Valve's Proton layer allows a large percentage of the Steam library to run on Linux, and Valve's own Steam Deck runs a Linux-based OS. But compatibility is not universal, and competitive multiplayer titles with kernel-level anti-cheat software frequently don't work. If your job requires specific Windows-only enterprise software, VPN clients configured for Windows, or hardware peripherals with Windows-only drivers, those are real constraints. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Linux is not a universal replacement. For Windows, and for some users, it genuinely isn't the right choice right now. That's the honest answer. But for a student doing research and writing papers, a remote worker running browser-based tools, a retiree doing email and video calls, a developer building software, and I mean a genuine large percentage of everyday computer users, Linux does the job, does it well, and costs nothing to run year after year. One more thing worth knowing, you don't have to choose permanently up front. Running Linux from a live USB or dual booting Linux alongside Windows lets you test the experience on your actual hardware before you commit. That safety net is available and costs you nothing but time. Here's the question nobody asks in these comparisons. Free compared to what exactly? When people hesitate at Linux, the hesitation is usually framed as a trade-off between cost and convenience. Linux is free but harder. Windows costs money but just works. And I understand that framing because it contains a kernel of truth. But it's also incomplete in a way that I think deserves to be named. The convenience of Windows has a price that extends beyond the subscription costs we talked about earlier. It includes the time you spend managing updates that restart your machine without asking. It includes the cognitive overhead of navigating settings menus increasingly designed to surface Microsoft services. It includes the data, your search queries, your app usage patterns, your location. If you've left it on, that flows to Microsoft's servers under the default configuration. A 2023 study by researcher Joanna Rutkowska, whose work in platform security is well regarded in the security research community, along with earlier analysis from the privacy-focused research group at Trinity College Dublin, found that Windows 11 under default settings makes regular contact with Microsoft servers even when no Microsoft apps are actively in use. That contact includes telemetry data, behavioral data about how you use your machine. You can turn some of this off in settings. Microsoft does provide the controls, but the default is collection, and most users never change defaults. That's not an accident. Linux's inconvenience is front-loaded. The installation takes an afternoon. The learning curve is a few weeks. After that, the machine runs on your terms. Updates happen when you tell them to, data goes where you send it, and the operating system isn't trying to sell you anything. You're the administrator of your own computer, not a guest in someone else's ecosystem. Here's something I want you to sit with. The reason you're comparing a $500 Windows laptop to a free Linux PC is because the gap is real, and it's been real for years, and the tech media conversation just hasn't been willing to have it plainly. Linux distributions are no longer a hobbyist experiment. Ubuntu has been running reliably on consumer hardware since 2004. The Linux kernel powers the servers running most of the internet, including the servers that serve you YouTube, Netflix, and Google Search. The same kernel runs Android on your phone. This is not fringe technology. It is the most widely deployed operating system in the world, just not on consumer desktops. And the reason it hasn't taken over the desktop isn't that it can't do the job. It's that there's no billion-dollar retail channel pushing it onto the shelf next to the $500 machine. You don't have to make a dramatic switch today, but you do deserve to make the comparison with full information, not just the sticker price. Pull up the 3-year cost. Think about what you actually use your computer for. Download a live USB and spend an afternoon with it. The free machine is more capable than the price suggests, and the $500 machine is more expensive than the tag admits. That's the honest comparison. Now you have it. If this breakdown changed how you're thinking about your next computer purchase, share it with someone who's in the market right now, because this is exactly the kind of math that doesn't get explained at the register. And subscribe if you want more of these honest, numbers-first comparisons. No affiliate links to the $500 laptop, no sponsored segments, just the actual math.